The night before my hip replacement surgery, my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table and calmly told me I wouldn't be coming home. Not "we'll figure it out," not "let's talk about what's best for you," just a flat, rehearsed sentence like he'd practiced it in the car on the way over. "We're not taking you home after surgery, Mom. It's already decided." My name is Diane. I was 67 years old, 12 hours away from major surgery, and my own son had just informed me, without asking a single question about what I wanted, that my house, the house I had lived in for 32 years, the house where I had raised him, was no longer going to be my home. I remember sitting very still, my hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea, waiting for him to explain. He didn't explain much. He simply said it had already been decided, that a lovely assisted living facility had graciously accepted me, that Rachel, his wife, had already toured 3 different rooms and picked the one with the best natural light. Nobody had asked me a single question. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it's the heart of everything that follows. Not one question. Not "Mom, what do you want?" Not "how are you feeling about all this?" Just decisions already made, delivered to me like a schedule I was expected to follow. What Kevin didn't know, sitting at my kitchen table that night with that flat, rehearsed voice, was that I had already spent the past 3 weeks quietly preparing for exactly this moment. And within 2 days of that conversation, I was going to call my lawyer and set in motion something that would completely unravel the plan he and Rachel had been building behind my back. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back a few months, to the moment I first noticed something wasn't right. I had lived a fairly ordinary, contented life up until that year. My husband, George, passed away 6 years earlier from lung disease, leaving me alone in the house we'd bought together as young newlyweds, back when the neighborhood was still mostly farmland and the mortgage payments felt impossibly large. I raised Kevin largely on my own during George's final illness, since George's decline had been slow and demanding, requiring most of my attention for years before he passed. Kevin grew into a capable, intelligent young man, but also, and I say this with love, not bitterness, a man who struggled deeply with financial discipline. He'd started 3 different businesses in his adult life: a landscaping company that folded within 2 years, a consulting venture that never quite found its footing. Most recently, an online retail business that Rachel had convinced him to invest heavily in, using savings, credit lines, and eventually, I would later learn, considerably more than either of them ever openly admitted to me. I helped where I reasonably could over the years, small loans here and there, the kind any mother offers her struggling child. But I was always careful, the way my own parents had raised me to be, about how much I gave and under what circumstances. That carefulness, I would soon discover, had become a problem for Kevin and Rachel in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. About 4 months before my surgery, I began needing a hip replacement due to worsening arthritis that had plagued me for years. It was a common, relatively low-risk procedure, though recovery would require several weeks of careful support physical therapy, help with daily tasks, someone present during the initial healing period. Naturally, I assumed Kevin and Rachel would help coordinate my recovery, the way any family typically does. Kevin lived only 15 minutes away. Rachel worked part-time and had more flexibility than most. I brought up my upcoming surgery over dinner one evening, mentioning casually that I'd likely need some help around the house for the first few weeks. Rachel's reaction, in hindsight, should have told me everything. "Oh, Diane," she said, her voice carrying a practiced sweetness I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "We've actually been thinking about this. Have you considered maybe looking into some short-term rehabilitation facilities? They're really wonderful these days, proper medical staff, physical therapists right on site. It might honestly be easier for your recovery than trying to manage things at home alone." I remember feeling a small flicker of unease, though I dismissed it quickly. It seemed reasonable enough on the surface. Rehabilitation facilities do exist for exactly this purpose. "I'll think about it," I said, "but I'd really rather recover at home if possible. This house has been my home for over 30 years. Kevin nodded along quietly, not offering much of an opinion either way. I noticed that pattern too, though I didn't fully register its significance at the time. Kevin's growing tendency to stay quiet whenever Rachel took the lead on family decisions. Over the following weeks, the conversation about rehabilitation facilities kept resurfacing, gently but persistently, always framed around my own well-being, my own comfort, my own safety. "It's just Diane, this house has stairs," Rachel pointed out during one visit. "And you'll be recovering from major surgery. It seems like a real safety risk." "There are stair lifts," I said. "George and I discussed installing one years ago, actually, for exactly this kind of situation." "That seems like an unnecessary expense," Rachel replied smoothly, "when there are facilities specifically designed for this kind of recovery." I began noticing, too, subtle questions creeping into conversations that had nothing directly to do with my hip surgery. Questions about the house's estimated value. Questions about whether I'd ever considered downsizing. Questions, once disguised carefully as idle curiosity, about whether I still had George's old life insurance policy and what exactly it had been worth. I answered honestly, each time, without much suspicion. I had no reason yet to connect these separate threads into anything resembling a pattern. That changed about 3 weeks before my surgery date, when I discovered something in my own mailbox that I was never meant to see. It was an unusually warm afternoon in early spring when I checked my mailbox and found, mixed in among the usual bills and flyers, an envelope addressed not to me, but to Kevin at my address. I almost set it aside without a second thought. Kevin occasionally still used my address for certain mail, a habit left over from years earlier when he'd briefly lived with me between apartments. But something about the return address caught my eye. A local law firm I didn't recognize, one that specialized, according to a quick search I did later that evening, in elder law and guardianship proceedings. I want to be honest with you here, I almost didn't open it. Some deeply ingrained sense of privacy nearly stopped me. It wasn't addressed to me after all. But something, call it instinct, call it the quiet unease that had been building for weeks, made me open it anyway. Inside was a preliminary consultation summary outlining the general process for petitioning for guardianship over an elderly parent deemed unable to manage their own affairs. It wasn't a filed legal document. It wasn't binding in any way. It was simply informational material, the kind any law firm sends after an initial consultation call. But it was addressed to Kevin, at my house, about guardianship, weeks before my surgery. I sat down at my kitchen table, that same table where he would later tell me I wasn't coming home, and read through the document slowly, my hands trembling slightly. I want to explain something important here, because I think it matters for understanding exactly how frightening this discovery was. Guardianship proceedings, when legitimately necessary, exist to protect genuinely vulnerable elderly individuals who can no longer safely manage their own medical or financial decisions, people suffering from advanced dementia, severe cognitive decline, situations where family intervention is truly, tragically necessary. I was, at the time, sharp, capable, fully independent, managing my own finances, my own medical decisions, my own life entirely on my own. There was no reasonable justification for anyone to be exploring guardianship proceedings regarding me. Unless, of course, someone intended to manufacture that justification. I sat with that thought for a long time that evening, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Was Kevin, my own son, actually exploring the possibility of having me declared legally incapable, simply to gain control over my finances, my house, my life? I told myself at first that I was overreacting. Perhaps this was simply preliminary research, unrelated to any actual intention. Perhaps Kevin had consulted a lawyer about an entirely different family situation, a friend's parent, perhaps. Or general information gathering, unrelated to me at all. But the timing was too precise. 3 weeks before my surgery, during a period when Rachel had been steadily, persistently pushing the idea of a rehabilitation facility instead of home recovery. I needed more information before I allowed myself to fully believe what I feared. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of, though I don't regret it either, given everything that followed. I called Kevin directly and asked him, plainly, if everything was all right with him and Rachel financially. Kevin's reaction told me almost everything I needed to know. "Why are you asking that?" he said, his voice immediately defensive, sharper than I expected. "I'm just checking in, sweetheart," I said carefully. "You've seemed stressed lately. I wanted to make sure everything's all right." There was a long pause. "Things are tight, honestly. The business has had some setbacks, but we're handling it." "Handling it how?" I asked gently. Another pause, longer this time. "Rachel's been looking into some options. Nothing you need to worry about, Mom." I didn't push further that evening. I didn't want to reveal what I'd discovered, not yet, not until I understood more clearly what exactly I was dealing with. But that night, lying awake long after the conversation ended, I made a decision that would ultimately protect everything I'd spent my life building. I called my lawyer the very next morning. Her name was Patricia Nguyen, a sharp, thoughtful woman who had handled my and George's estate planning for nearly 15 years. I explained everything carefully: the envelope, the persistent facility conversations, Kevin's evasive answers about the business struggles. Patricia listened carefully, asking clarifying questions throughout. "Deanne," she said finally, "I want to be very clear about something. Based on everything you're describing, there is absolutely no legitimate medical or legal basis for guardianship proceedings against you. You're fully cognitively capable, managing your own affairs independently. If someone is exploring this path, it strongly suggests financial motivation, rather than genuine concern for your well-being." I felt something twist painfully in my chest at those words, even though, on some level, I had already suspected exactly that. "What should I do?" I asked quietly. "First," Patricia said, "we need to make sure your affairs are completely, thoroughly protected before your surgery. Updated power of attorney, clearly assigned to someone you trust, completely someone other than Kevin, given the current circumstances. Updated healthcare directives. And I'd strongly recommend arranging your post-surgery care independently, through professional home healthcare services, rather than relying on any informal family arrangement that could potentially be manipulated." I sat with her words carefully. "I don't want to believe my own son would do this," I said honestly. "I understand," Patricia said gently. "But protecting yourself doesn't require you to believe the worst about him with certainty. It simply requires you to ensure that, regardless of anyone's intentions, you remain fully in control of your own life and decisions." That conversation became the turning point of everything that followed. Over the following 2 weeks, I worked carefully and quietly with Patricia to protect myself, without revealing to Kevin or Rachel exactly what I was doing. I updated my power of attorney, transferring decision-making authority, in the event of any incapacity, to my niece Jennifer, George's sister's daughter, a level-headed, trustworthy woman I'd remained close to over the years, who lived just across town and had always shown genuine, uncomplicated care toward me. I updated my healthcare directives clearly, ensuring my own wishes regarding treatment and recovery would be explicitly documented and legally protected. And most importantly, I arranged, independently and privately, professional home healthcare support for my recovery, period A qualified nurse who would visit daily during my first 3 weeks of recovery, along with a physical therapist who would come to the house twice weekly. I paid for all of this myself, quietly, using savings George, and I had carefully built over decades specifically for situations like unexpected medical needs. I didn't tell Kevin or Rachel any of this, not because I wanted to deceive them, but because I needed to understand, clearly and completely, what their true intentions were before revealing my own preparations. I didn't have to wait long to find out. About a week before my surgery, Rachel visited alone one afternoon, ostensibly to help me pack a small bag of essentials for what she still referred to as my temporary stay at the rehabilitation facility. "I found the perfect place, Diane," she said brightly, showing me photographs on her phone of a pleasant-looking facility with tasteful furniture and cheerful common areas. Sunny Meadows. They have wonderful reviews, and it's actually not too far from us. I appreciate you looking into this, Rachel, I said carefully, but I've decided I'd like to recover here at home, as I originally planned. Her expression shifted slightly, the bright cheerfulness cooling almost instantly. Diane, I really think, given the stairs, given your age, given how demanding recovery from hip surgery can be. I've arranged professional home health care, I said calmly. A nurse will visit daily, and I'll have physical therapy sessions here at the house as well. I'll be well cared for. Rachel's smile tightened noticeably. That seems like an awfully expensive arrangement, doesn't it? Sunny Meadows would actually be more affordable, especially considering. She stopped herself abruptly, as though catching words she hadn't intended to say aloud. Considering what? I asked quietly. Nothing, she said quickly. I just think it's important to be financially responsible, especially at your age, when unexpected expenses can add up. I let the conversation drop that day, though her words lingered uncomfortably in my mind long after she left. Especially considering. I understood, without needing further clarification, exactly what she'd almost said. 2 days before my surgery, Kevin visited alone, ostensibly to help me review some final paperwork related to my hospital admission. Among the routine hospital forms, I noticed an additional document he'd brought along, a general power of attorney form, already partially filled out, designating Kevin as my primary decision-maker for both medical and financial matters. Just as a precaution, Mom, in case anything unexpected happens during surgery. I looked at that document for a long moment. Memories of Robert's no, wait, this wasn't that story. This was my own life, my own kitchen table, my own son sitting across from me with a document eerily similar to something I'd feared discovering. Kevin, I said carefully, I've already updated my power of attorney with Patricia. Jennifer is my designated decision-maker now, along with clear healthcare directives already in place. Kevin's face went pale, genuine surprise flickering across his features. You didn't mention that to me. I didn't think I needed to inform you of every legal decision I make regarding my own affairs, I said gently, but firmly. Just as you apparently didn't feel the need to inform me about the guardianship consultation you had 3 weeks ago. The color drained further from his face. How did you? An envelope arrived at my house, addressed to you, I said simply. I read it. I won't apologize for that, Kevin, given everything else I've since discovered. He sat in stunned silence for a long moment, the partially completed power of attorney form still resting on the table between us. Mom, it's not what it looks like, he said finally, though his voice lacked real conviction. Then explain it to me, I said quietly. Explain why my own son was consulting a guardianship lawyer 3 weeks before my surgery, while simultaneously pressuring me toward a facility I never wanted, instead of simply asking me directly what kind of help I actually needed. Kevin didn't have a good answer that day. He mumbled something vague about just exploring options and wanting to be prepared, but the explanation felt hollow, especially given everything else I'd already pieced together. He left shortly after, clearly rattled, and I didn't hear from him again until the evening before my surgery, the same evening he sat across from me at my kitchen table and delivered that flat, rehearsed sentence. We're not taking you home after surgery, Mom. It's already decided. I want to walk you through exactly what happened next, because I think the calm, deliberate way I responded matters just as much as the words themselves. I set down my tea carefully. Decided by whom exactly? Rachel and I discussed it, he said. We really think Sunny Meadows is the safer option. I see, I said evenly. And did either of you consider discussing this with me directly, rather than simply informing me the night before my surgery that a decision affecting my own home and recovery has already been made without my input? Kevin shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we're just trying to do what's best. For whom, Kevin? I asked, my voice still calm, though something firmer had settled beneath it now. Best for me, or best for whatever financial pressure you and Rachel are currently under. His face flushed deeply. That's not fair. Isn't it? I said. Because 3 weeks ago, an envelope arrived at my house from a guardianship attorney, addressed to you. 2 days ago, you brought me a power of attorney form, already partially completed, nomming yourself as my sole decision-maker. And tonight, you're informing me, not asking me, that I won't be returning to my own home after surgery. Kevin stared at me, clearly stunned that I'd connected these separate threads so completely. I need you to be honest with me right now, I said quietly. Is this about my safety and recovery, or is this about the business debts you and Rachel have been struggling with, and the value of this house, and whatever life insurance policies you believe I still have from your father? The silence that followed felt like it stretched on forever. Finally, Kevin spoke, his voice breaking slightly. The business is in serious trouble, Mom. We're behind on almost everything. Rachel found this facility and she started looking into options because she said if you were somewhere with more oversight, it would be easier to manage things financially, at least temporarily, until we got back on our feet. Manage what things specifically? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The house, he admitted quietly. Rachel thought, if you were in assisted living, we could potentially take out a loan against the house equity, just temporarily, to cover some of the business debts. She said it would technically be easier to manage those decisions if I had power of attorney in place. I sat with that confession for a long moment, feeling a complicated mixture of heartbreak and quiet vindication. Kevin, I said finally, I need you to understand something clearly. I love you. I have always loved you, and I always will. But what you and Rachel have been quietly planning isn't protection. It's not concern for my well-being. It's a financial strategy built around removing my independence and control over my own life in order to solve problems you created through your own business decisions. He didn't deny it. He simply sat there, tears forming in his eyes, the full weight of what he'd been party to finally settling in. I already have professional home health care arranged, I continued. I already have updated legal protections in place, with Jennifer as my designated decision-maker should anything unexpected happen during surgery. I will be recovering in my own home, exactly as I originally planned. Kevin left that night without much further conversation, the weight of everything hanging heavily between us. I underwent my surgery the following morning as scheduled. It went smoothly, without complications, and I spent the following weeks recovering exactly as I'd planned in my own home, supported by the professional nurse and physical therapist I'd arranged independently, with Jennifer visiting regularly to help with additional errands and companionship. Kevin visited twice during that initial recovery period, each time subdued, uncertain how to navigate the new reality of our relationship. Rachel didn't visit at all. I want to be honest here. Those first few weeks of recovery were emotionally difficult, layered atop the physical difficulty of healing from major surgery. I grieved, in a strange way, the version of my relationship with Kevin I'd believed existed before that envelope arrived in my mailbox. But I never once regretted the decisions I'd made to protect myself. Because protecting myself, I came to understand clearly during those quiet weeks of recovery wasn't an act of aggression against my son. It was simply, finally, an act of basic self-respect. About 3 weeks into my recovery, Patricia called with additional information that added important context to everything that had happened. Diane, she said carefully, I did some additional research, given everything you've described, simply to ensure your protections are as thorough as possible, and I found something you should know about. She explained that Kevin's business, the online retail venture Rachel had encouraged him to heavily invest in, was facing significantly more serious financial trouble than either of them had likely admitted, even to themselves. Public records showed multiple outstanding liens, an ongoing lawsuit from a former business partner alleging mismanagement of shared investment funds, and mounting personal debt that far exceeded what a simple, temporary setback would suggest. This wasn't a short-term cash flow problem, Patricia explained. This was a business in serious, sustained financial distress, likely for well over a year. I sat with this information for a long moment, pieces of the puzzle settling uncomfortably into place. Why didn't he tell me the full extent of it? I asked quietly. I can't answer that with certainty, Patricia said gently. But based on the pattern of behavior you've described, the guardianship consultation, the persistent facility pressure, the power of attorney request, it seems reasonable to conclude that Kevin and Rachel viewed your assets, and specifically your home equity, as a potential solution to a problem that had grown far more serious than simple pride, allowed them to admit directly. I called Jennifer that evening, needing someone to talk through everything with, someone whose care for me had never once felt complicated by financial motivation. I don't know how to feel, I admitted to her honestly. Angry, obviously, but also just deeply sad. This is my son, Jennifer. I raised him. I never imagined he'd allow himself to be part of something like this. Jennifer, ever thoughtful, considered her words carefully before responding. I think, Aunt Diane, it's possible to hold two things as true at once. Kevin allowed himself to be pulled into something genuinely harmful toward you, likely out of desperation and poor judgment. And also, underneath that, he's still the same person who loves you, who simply lost his way under enormous financial pressure and Rachel's influence. Does that make it forgivable? I asked. I don't know, she said honestly. I think that's something only you can decide, and only over time, based on what he does next, not just what he says. Her words stayed with me during the remainder of my recovery, guiding how I approached the eventual, difficult conversations that followed. About a month after my surgery, once I'd regained enough strength and mobility to resume more normal daily activities, I asked Kevin to meet me for coffee, alone, without Rachel present. He arrived looking visibly worn down, the confident, if somewhat evasive, version of my son replaced by someone clearly carrying significant weight. Mom, he said before I could speak, I need to apologize. Really apologize, not just for the surgery situation, but for everything. Rachel and I have been struggling so much with the business debt, and I let that struggle completely cloud my judgment about what was actually right. Tell me honestly, I said. Was there ever a genuine conversation between you and Rachel about my safety and well-being? Or was this entirely about solving your financial problems? Kevin was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how honest to be. Honestly, he finally admitted, it started because Rachel was genuinely worried about the stairs, about you living alone after surgery. But somewhere along the way, as our financial situation got more desperate, it turned into something else. Rachel started talking about how, if I had power of attorney, we could access the equity in your house to cover the business debts, at least temporarily. And I let myself go along with it, because I was scared, and because it felt like an easier solution than admitting how badly we'd messed up. I want to pause here, because I think it's important to clarify something about what revenge actually meant in this particular story. I didn't call Patricia to punish Kevin. I didn't update my power of attorney or arrange independent home health care out of spite or anger. I did it because a mother's love, real love, doesn't require abandoning her own safety, independence, and dignity, simply to avoid uncomfortable confrontation with her own child. The consequences that followed consequences, Kevin and Rachel, brought upon themselves entirely through their own choices, were simply the natural result of a plan built on dishonesty, finally colliding with the truth. What happens now? Kevin asked quietly during that same coffee conversation. Between us, I mean. That depends entirely on you, I said honestly. I love you, Kevin. I will always love you. But love doesn't mean unconditional access to my home, my finances, or my independence, especially after everything that's happened. Rebuilding trust will require consistent honesty from you, not just today, but over time. What about Rachel? He asked. I considered my answer carefully. I think that's a conversation you and Rachel need to have honestly between yourselves about the kind of pressure that led you both toward decisions neither of you should be proud of. My relationship with Rachel, moving forward, will depend entirely on whether she's willing to acknowledge what actually happened, rather than continuing to frame it as simple concern for my safety. Kevin nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. I understand. I really do, Mom. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I believe you're sorry, I said honestly. But Kevin, I need you to understand something clearly, moving forward. I've already updated my legal protections permanently. Jennifer remains my designated decision-maker for medical and financial matters. This isn't a punishment aimed at you specifically. It's simply a boundary I intend to maintain, regardless of how our relationship develops from here. Over the following months, Kevin made a genuine, consistent effort to rebuild honesty within our relationship. He sought financial counseling for the business debts, eventually deciding, painfully but responsibly, to close the struggling online venture entirely rather than continuing to search for increasingly desperate solutions. He found a stable position working for an established local company, a significant step down from the entrepreneurial ambitions he'd once held, but a far more sustainable path forward given everything that had happened. Rachel, for her part, remained distant for several months, clearly uncomfortable with how thoroughly her original plan had unraveled. Eventually, she reached out directly, requesting a conversation. Diane, she said, when we finally sat down together, I owe you a genuine apology, not just for the plan itself, but for how easily I convinced myself it was reasonable, even caring, rather than what it actually was. What was it in your own words? I asked directly. She took a long breath before answering. An attempt to solve our financial problems by taking control away from you, dressed up as concern for your safety. I told myself for a long time that it was genuinely about what was best for you. But if I'm honest, once the business troubles became serious, it became much more about what was convenient and financially beneficial for us. Her honesty, difficult as it clearly was for her to voice, meant something genuine to me. A year after my surgery, our family gathered for a quiet dinner, the first genuinely relaxed family gathering we'd shared since everything had unfolded. Kevin had stabilized significantly in his new position, slowly rebuilding financial security through disciplined, consistent effort rather than the high-risk ventures that had previously defined his career choices. Rachel had taken on additional part-time work as well, both of them working steadily, together, to fully repay the debts that had originally driven their desperate decision-making. My relationship with both of them remained different than it had been before, more careful, more consciously bounded, built now on a foundation of hard-earned honesty rather than assumed, uncomplicated trust. I maintained my updated legal protections permanently. Jennifer remained my designated decision-maker, a role she continued fulfilling with the same steady, uncomplicated care she'd always shown me. But slowly, carefully, genuine warmth began returning to my relationship with Kevin and Rachel, as well, not the same relationship as before, perhaps, but something more honest, and in its own way, more resilient for having survived such a difficult reckoning. I think about that night often, Kevin admitted to me during that dinner, his voice quiet and reflective. Sitting across from you at the kitchen table, telling you that decision had already been made. I think about how easily I let fear and desperation convince me that was somehow acceptable. What do you understand now that you didn't then? I asked gently. He considered the question carefully. That real love asks questions instead of making decisions for someone. That protecting someone means listening to what they actually want, not deciding what's convenient and calling it protection. I felt something settle warmly in my chest at those words, not complete healing, perhaps, but genuine, hard-earned understanding. I want to share one more moment from that evening, because I think it captures something important about how this story ultimately resolved. Rachel, near the end of dinner, raised her glass unexpectedly. I want to say something, she said, her voice steady but emotional. Deanne, I know I have to keep earning back your trust, not just through words, but through time and consistent honesty. But I want you to know, I've learned something important through all of this. Real care for someone doesn't mean removing their choices. It means respecting them enough to ask, honestly, what they actually need. I raised my own glass in response. To honesty, I said, and to relationships built on respect rather than convenient assumptions. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Some tension, some careful distance remained between us and likely always would, given everything that had happened. But it was an honest resolution built now on truth, rather than the quiet manipulation that had nearly cost me my independence entirely. I think often about that night before my surgery, Kevin's flat, rehearsed sentence, delivered across my own kitchen table, informing me that a decision about my own home and recovery had already been made without my input. For most of my life, I believed that love meant trust, unconditional and uncomplicated. That family members, especially children we raise and love deeply, would never allow financial desperation to compromise their basic respect for our autonomy and dignity. But I learned something important through this experience, something I carry with me still, especially as I've grown older. Aging doesn't mean surrendering your voice, your independence, or your right to make decisions about your own life. And love, genuine love, never requires removing someone's choices under the guise of protecting them. If you're reading this, or listening to this story, and you're navigating similar territory aging parents, complicated family dynamics, decisions being made about your care or your assets without your full, genuine input, I hope, this story offers you something important. You are allowed to ask hard questions. You are allowed to seek independent legal guidance, even when it feels uncomfortable to consider that family members might not have entirely pure intentions. You are allowed, always, regardless of your age or your health circumstances, to protect your own autonomy and dignity. Real family, real love, doesn't require you to surrender control simply because surrendering feels easier than confronting an uncomfortable truth. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for the people who have temporarily lost their way, is to hold firm boundaries, allowing natural consequences to teach lessons that quiet acceptance never could. That's the lesson I want to leave you with today. Because independence, dignity, and self-respect aren't things we should ever have to fight to protect from the people who are supposed to love us most. But when we do have to fight for them, we should never hesitate to do exactly that. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the importance of protecting your independence, your dignity, or your voice within your own family relationships, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And remember, the next time someone tries to make decisions about your life without asking what you actually want, you don't have to simply accept it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is pick up the phone and call the person who will help you protect what's truly yours.